Light used to be precious, not convenient, not disposable. Precious. And long before batteries, LEDs or flashlights, people figured out a way to trap flame, stretch fuel and turn a simple glass jar into one of the most reliable survival lights ever made. That trick never really disappeared. It just went quiet. And today, preppers around the world are still copying it for one simple reason. It works when everything else fails. This is the jar lantern trick. And once you understand why it mattered, you'll never look at a glass jar the same way again. Jar lanterns didn't come from a single inventor or a patent office. They evolved quietly, passed down through necessity. You find versions of them in 19th century farmhouses, mining camps, railway shanties, military field kits and early 20th century disaster shelters. Wherever people needed light that was safe, portable and fuel efficient, the jar lantern showed up. Not because it was clever, but because it solved real problems with almost nothing. At its core, the idea is brutally simple. You take an open flame, usually a candle or oil wick, and enclose it inside a glass jar. But that simplicity hides a lot of smart physics and hard-earned experience. The jar controls airflow. It shields the flame from wind. It reflects and diffuses light. It reduces smoke. And most importantly, it lowers the risk of accidental fires in cramped or flammable spaces. That combination made it invaluable long before modern safety standards existed. Here's where things get interesting. Early users didn't just drop a candle into a jar and call it a day. They modified the setup based on need. Some punched small holes in metal lids to regulate oxygen. Others suspended the candle from a wire so melted wax didn't pool and drown the flame. Oil versions used cloth wicks anchored through pierced lids, allowing steady burn rates that could last all night. These weren't decorations. They were tuned tools. In mining camps, jar lanterns were preferred because they protected flames from drafts deep underground. In barns and root cellars, they reduced the chance of sparks igniting hay or dust. During blackouts in the early 1900s, families used them to safely move from room to room without tipping an open candle. Even during World War I and World War II, improvised jar lanterns appeared in civilian shelters when proper lamps were unavailable. Glass jars were everywhere. Fuel was scarce. Ingenuity filled the gap. Now, here's the part most people miss. The jar doesn't just protect the flame, it makes the flame more efficient. By limiting airflow, combustion slows slightly, which means fuel burns longer. The glass also captures heat and stabilizes the flame, preventing flicker and uneven burning. That's why a jar lantern can outlast a bare candle by a surprising margin. It's not magic, it's controlled fire. Modern preppers understand this instinctively. When the grid goes down, batteries die. Solar chargers fail in bad weather. Fuel-powered generators draw attention and noise. But a jar lantern? It runs on candle stubs, cooking oil, animal fat, even improvised fuels in a pinch. You can build one with scrap wire, a jar, and whatever burns. That flexibility is gold in long-term survival planning. There's also a psychological side to this that history understood well. Steady light matters, not just for seeing, but for morale. A flickering candle feels fragile. A jar lantern feels solid, reliable. It creates a small island of safety in darkness. That mattered in the past, and it still matters now. Anyone who has spent nights off-grid knows how quickly darkness wears you down. Different regions adapted the jar lantern to local conditions. In colder climates, thicker glass helped retain heat and prevent cracking. In coastal areas, oil lantern versions were sealed tighter to prevent salt air from affecting the flame. Some cultures even used tinted glass to reduce glare or signal location without broadcasting light too far. These weren't aesthetic choices. They were survival decisions. Now, this is where things get clever. The jar lantern also doubles as a heat source, albeit a small one. In enclosed spaces like tents, huts, or cellars, it can raise ambient temperature just enough to take the edge off cold nights. Not enough to rely on, but enough to matter. And because the flame is enclosed, the risk is lower than an exposed fire. Lower, not zero. History respected fire. It never trusted it blindly. Of course, jar lanterns weren't without limits. Poor ventilation could lead to soot build-up or oxygen depletion. Cracked glass could fail under heat stress. Spilled fuel was always a danger. People learned these lessons the hard way. That's why historical instructions often emphasized airflow control and never sealing the jar completely. A living flame needs to breathe. Forget that, and the lantern becomes a liability. What's fascinating is how closely modern DIY survival guides mirror these old practices. Preppers today recommend metal lids with punched holes. They warn against airtight seals. They advise using heat-resistant glass. They suggest reflective backings to boost light output. None of this is new. It's rediscovery. The same knowledge resurfacing because the conditions that created it haven't gone away. And unlike many survival tricks floating around online, this one scales. You can make a jar lantern in just a few minutes during an emergency. Or you can refine it into a long-burning, stable light source for weeks of off-grid living. That scalability is why it survived into the modern era. It wasn't replaced, it was sidelined, and now, well, it's back. There's something humbling about that. For all our technology, when systems fail, we reach backward. Not out of nostalgia, but because those solutions were forged under pressure. People didn't have backups. They had one chance to get it right. The jar lantern is a reminder that good design doesn't need complexity. It needs understanding. Here's the real takeaway. The jar lantern isn't about light. It's about mindset. Using what's available, respecting risk, making small improvements that compound into reliability. That's the same mindset that built early survival knowledge across centuries. And it's the same mindset that keeps people alive when convenience disappears. So the next time you see an old glass jar, don't think trash or storage. Think potential. Think controlled fire. Think about the generations who depended on that quiet glow to work, to wait out storms, to survive nights that felt endless. That's not history collecting dust. That's history still doing its job. If you want more forgotten skills like this, the kind that stood the test of real hardship, make sure you stay connected with Legacy of Survival. Like the video, share it with someone who values practical knowledge, and subscribe so you don't miss what history still has to teach us. Because the past isn't gone, it's just waiting to be used again.